Hello, I'm Elise Labott. I'm the founder and CEO of Zivi Media and former CNN Global Affairs correspondent. I want to thank you all, and especially to members of the council, for tuning in from all over the world to this exciting and timely conversation, and especially our young professional members. As a reminder, the council is a nonprofit, independent, and nonpartisan platform, and the views expressed by our panelists today are really their own and don't represent institutional positions or views of the council. And we're also going to be taking your questions throughout we'll go to a question portion, but you can start now throughout the program. Type CCGA live in your browser and we'll get to your questions later on the program. So today is a fascinating conversation. Not only is it timely because we have the NBA All-Star game coming up, the Olympics are in China right now, and today we're talking about the National Basketball Association's China operations. They're worth over $5 billion. And following the lead of many U.S. companies, the NBA has really deepened its business relationship with China over the years. But as everyone knows, competition with China is becoming more salient. Americans are also becoming more familiar with China's human rights record. And the NBA is finding itself caught between these two cultures of America and China. And NBA fans, team owners, even players have become vocal about their apprehension to this cozy connection in the NBA's most important international market. And China has shown it's ready to push back against what it feels is international interference in domestic matters. So again, as we head into the 2020 NBA All-Star Weekend, I think it's fair to say that this partnership with China is riddled in controversy. And it also opens up larger issues about our relationships with our sports heroes. I mean, we love when players like LeBron James, Steph Curry, and others, we celebrate their leadership on the field, but we're sometimes conflicted about their leadership on social and political issues. And I think that depends on the issue, right? Both here and abroad. So do athletes have this obligation to speak up? Can they have their own opinions when they're working for a big league that has business interests like the NBA? And should the leagues be supporting American values, or does politics not belong on the sports field at all? And I'm so excited to dive into this and discuss with Marc Edelman, Sports Ethics Director at the Robert Zicklin Center for Corporate Integrity at Baruch College, and Jabari Young, National Sports Business Reporter for CNBC. Great to have you guys.
Great to be here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
All right, so let's dive in. Marc, set the scene for us. And let's talk about the history of this NBA China venture, because it's really quite extraordinary.
Well, this venture developed over a period of time. We could trace this all the way back to 1979. Now, in the 1970s, the United States under Richard Nixon and China under Mao Zedong made a conscious effort to improve their relations with one another. And one of the ways this was achieved was through sport. So a lot of people have seen like Forrest Gump, no ping pong diplomacy. In 1979, we saw the beginning of basketball diplomacy, when the team at the time that was known as the Washington Bullets traveled to China for the first time to play in a series of exhibition games. After about 20 years of playing with working together, in 2002, the NBA for the first time set up offices in China, began hiring employees in China, and created their first Chinese website. And after this continued to go well from the standpoint of NBA owners, in 2008, they launched the full-blown NBA China initiative, which is a joint venture between the NBA and some of the largest Chinese companies. And these large Chinese companies, for those who don't recognize, the relationship between the company and the Chinese government are a lot more intertwined with one another than the relationship between business and government in the United States.
So, Jabari, the NBA has global partnerships around the world. Like, what makes this one with China different, and why are people talking about it?
Well, what makes it different is this is one of the biggest economies, depending on who you ask, the biggest economy in the world, right. With over 1 billion people. Listen, the NBA is on record, I believe, saying, over 300 million people play basketball in China. So, as Marc kind of alluded to the history there, it really kind of went through an acceleration period and 2 points, right? You go back to 1998 when Kobe Bryant went over there, and he's become one of the biggest well-known figures in China. And then you have Yao Ming when he was drafted in 2002. So, these two entities, China as well as the NBA, they've been aligned for such a very long time. And again, you're dealing with a major economy. You can't ignore China. You may not agree with what's going on there. You may not like some of the things that we're hearing out there as far as, human trafficking human rights violations and what have you. And, as you kind of alluded to, players and owners have spoken out about it. But again, this is a major economy, right? This is a major market.
Yeah, of course. But let's talk about some of these recent news stories about the statements and the advocacy among players and team owners and the league. I think, Jabari, it goes back about 2.5 years, 2019?
It may go further back, even more than that. Social media has allowed us to kind of capture in moments what people say. And listen, 2019 was not a good year, or at least the end of it, for the Chinese and NBA relationship. That obviously is still going through a tense moment because of Daryl Morey, and the comments he made supporting Hong Kong protesters. And, now you have Mr. Freedom, who is speaking out on behalf of people in Tibet. So, listen, we in this country, we enjoy the right of free speech. There's nothing that says that free speech doesn't have consequences. And the NBA has had financial consequences, and teams have had their media interrupted there if, the Chinese government doesn't agree with some of the things that, have been said. And we've seen that with the Houston Rockets after the comments from Mr. Morey. We've seen that with the Philadelphia 76ers, where Mr. Morey works now. And we've seen it with the Boston Celtics after, Mr. Freedom's comments. And so, you're going to have your opinion. But again, that opinion obviously is the Chinese government doesn't agree with that. The country doesn't agree with that. And it's, had a little bit of backlash from the NBA. But again, I don't think that partnership is going to be completely terminated because of that. It's just going through a difficult period right now.
So, Mark, let's talk about where things stand right now. As Jabari mentioned, when the comments were made in 2019 by Molly, the Celtics player talked about Tibet. The NBA, China stopped playing the NBA games. And then there was kind of a kiss and make up period, right? Where China kind of reached out and said, we're so sorry. The NBA reached out and said, we're so sorry. We appreciate Chinese culture. And there was money given during COVID. And then when, Kobe Bryant died, the Chinese kind of reciprocated and celebrated what he gave to the game. And I think, both sides kind of realize that this partnership is too big to fail. So there's an effort to kind of get back together and not agree to disagree, but try and move past it.
Well, I mean, that is very similar with what we've seen with other businesses around the world that have had confrontations with China. And again, Chinese businesses and Chinese government are very intertwined. And there seems to be a history of this where a business somehow offends the Chinese government view on things, and the Chinese government says, we are not going to interact with this business anymore. And then there's a period of time in which some type of concession is almost required to be made. And the level of concession historically has been lower, the more important the industry is to the Chinese people and the less replicable it could be. And then at some point it resumed. But even with the resumption of NBA games being broadcast on China, my understanding is they continue not to broadcast games involving the Boston Celtics when Enos Kanter Freedom was playing for the team. At the same time, what seems to go almost unnoticed was Daryl Morey had been the general manager of the Houston Rockets at the point in time which the comments were made. And the Houston Rockets are an especially important team to China because that is where Yao Ming played. And from the Chinese government's perspective, they gave Yao Ming the opportunity to go to the Rockets. So it's a uniquely popular team in China. Daryl Morey's position came to the end or was terminated by the Rockets. He ended up now working as general manager over with the Philadelphia 76ers. But one might argue that the end of Morey working for the Rockets might have been seen as part of this conciliation as well, albeit not directly ever stated.
So it's interesting, Jabari, what Mark said, it depends on the business and how important it is to China and how important the game or the team is in China, because bottom line, and I think you wrote this, there are more basketball fans in China with 1.4 billion residents than in the US. That's A. And B, look, these star players are traveling every year for promotional tours. And the shoe sales, talk about the shoe sales. That's a huge source of revenue for Chinese manufacturers.
It's all a huge source of revenue, all of it. If I put it like this, this whole conversation, when it was introduced to me, it reminded me of a talk I had with David Stern, who kind of helped build the relationship with China. And before he died, and when it was, Mr. Moore was going through all the things that he went through, was in 2019. I asked him, I said, will China just completely shut out the NBA? And he says, it won't happen. I said, well, why not? And he says, because they understand how important the NBA is to their culture, right? At the end of the day, the NBA is a media company. They provide sports entertainment. They're not government officials. They're not political figures. They're asked their opinion on things, and they give it because, again, we live in a land of free speech. So they're an entertainment company, a media company. They are out to make money. And the Chinese market, they understand how important it is to them. And if they really didn't agree on views and they really didn't agree on things, you will see the revenue completely shut off. If the Chinese government or the Chinese did not want the NBA, you wouldn't see their games still streaming on Tencent, which they are now. So again, it goes beyond just, sneaker revenue. It goes bigger, it's way bigger than that. The NBA has a lot of social currency, right? And they're using it throughout the world because their players are some of the, most well-known people, because they don't play games with helmets on like the NFL does. And they're much more accessible. Other than, MLB, they don't want anything to do with promoting their own game. But the NBA is it's a global entity, and it's big. But at the end of the day, again, they're an entertainment company. So they're walking a fine line with geopolitics. And it's not a line that you always want to walk. But in this case, they have to do it because, again, that's a $5 billion operation. You cut that off, the NBA profit goes down, basketball-related revenue goes down, and it's just not good for business overall, just not outside of sneakers.
I want to get into the kind of, how they're using that, what we call in the diplomatic wonky world, soft power, to kind of spread, their brand and be an influencer around the world. But let's talk a little bit about the hypocrisy of it all. Because, the NBA has developed this reputation in recent years for for leading on social justice, and, when you look at, for instance, the United States, and we're talking about these, shoe sales, Congress, for instance, has been, hey, look, you shouldn't be working with these companies that are believed to be complicit in forced labor camps in regions of China, like Xinjiang, where the Uyghur Muslims are. And I remember, I found this in 2006, Stern did this interview with Sports Illustrated, and he said, look, I have a lot of problems with China's human rights record. At the end of the day, I have a responsibility to my owners to make money, no matter what my personal feelings are. So, Mark, talk to us about this balance, because it seems like what the NBA is saying is, if it's about George Floyd or about Black Lives Matter, go for it. We totally support you 100%. But if it's about big business in China, and that's very popular with a lot of basketball fans in the U.S. But if it's about China, where, that's going to affect the bottom line, it's like, wait a minute, shut your mouth.
It's really interesting to me, because if we want to talk about the history of a government trying to financially harm a sports league for speaking out against their interests, and we leave aside China, the one example that stands out to me and we can't ignore was the most recent president of the United States, Donald Trump, after he made a whole series of statements calling for the firing of Colin Kaepernick for speaking out against Colin Kaepernick's support of Black Lives Matter. And kneeling during the playing of the national anthem, the NFL teams did not re-sign Kaepernick. And they really played into pressure from the U.S. government under Donald Trump to curtail the speech of one of their employees. And at that point in time, the NBA came off looking great, because you had the NBA players coming out wearing the Black Lives Matter shirts and being allowed to speak and being able to take a view. And now, all of a sudden, with the issue relating to China, and you see Enos Kanter Freedom no longer on a team, the question could be asked, has the Chinese government through the NBA done to Enos Kanter the same thing that the Donald Trump administration through the NFL had done to Colin Kaepernick? And I think now these two have to be brought together, And the question there is, are these two reconcilable? Or in this context, is the NBA caving too much to a government and not even our own?
Well, Jabari, like, talk to us about that balance, right, between, business and values. Like, obviously, China has these strict, media relations, limited media restrictions, limited speech. But, they're also saying, look, I think one of the CCTAers was kind of, they're using all these sports metaphors. If you foul, you have to, pay the price, right? The league has really achieved the level of success that no other international sports leagues that everyone wants. You're entitled to say whatever you want. We're entitled to not air your games. You have the right to express your values, and Chinese fans of the Houston Rockets have the right to abandon the team.
I can't lie. Listen, I've never been to China before. Again, walking the line of geopolitics is a tricky matter, right? The NBA has found themselves in the middle of this because of one of their executives who kind of spoke out, and now everybody is looking at the NBA to speak out on anything related to whatever is going on that's wrong in China. In 2001, I believe in July, Adam Silver kind of spoke to this because he was asked about it during the finals. And, he kind of, said, listen, at the end of the day, we don't bless everything that's happening in China. We don't. The NBA, again, is a media company. They're trying to walk a fine line, and they're trying to utilize their sport, their entertainment, their product to bring two countries that are currently feuding together. Whether or not it'll work, I don't know, right? Adam Silver is the boss of that. He gets paid multi-millions of dollars. If he needs my help, I'll quit CNBC and I'll get paid the money, and I'll offer him all the advice I can. But I don't know. I do know that I think a lot of these players are prepared to answer what happens here at home, right? And as kind of Mark, was speaking of, they are more comfortable talking about things that happen in their daily lives, like police shootings, like, discrimination and those matters and racial matters, which still plague this country today. Things that we know about, things that we are entitled to speak on. I'm from North Philadelphia, right? I can speak on that. I can't speak on everything that's going on in China. I've never been there, right? If you believe that the way that their government, how they're run, communists, they control a lot of the things that people see and what they can't see. And so you don't know what's going on there until you're on the ground, right? I depend a lot on the Millman Group. I think they do a phenomenal job aligning the business side of what the NBA is going through. And again, the NBA is trying to sustain their business there. They're not going to bless everything that's happening there. I think Adam Silver's gotten to a point now where they're starting to see some type of repair going on between the two parties. Again, it's going to sustain. It's not going to be interrupted, because if you interrupt the NBA product, you're telling 300 million people in China, right? We don't care about the thing that you care about the most. Right. I don't think that's good for your culture. So they find themselves in a very interesting position. Some people's going to argue, hey, you're hypocritical on one side because you're not speaking on this, and you're hypocritical on the other. You can go back and forth about who's right, who's wrong. But at the end of the day, the business side of it has to sustain because, again, they need each other. The NBA needs China if they continue to have their global affairs. They want to grow into a global sport, which they're aligning to do right now. And China needs the NBA because their consumers, they rely on basketball. They watch basketball. They play basketball, and they enjoy basketball. When Mark kind of said the games got interrupted, when they got back on CCTV, when the Lakers played in the NBA Finals during the bubble. You know why? Because the Lakers are such an important team to China because of Kobe Bryant, because of the relationship that was, sustained back in the day. And so that lets you know right now how important China is looking at how China is considering the NBA. You're still important. We're going to cut off a little bit of your revenue because we don't agree with everything you said, but you're still important. When that business gets interrupted completely, then I think you have a major problem on your hands.
Yeah, so clearly, like, the Chinese interest is there just as much as the NBA interest. But Mark, like, I do think it's kind of interesting, this line that the players are walking too, right? Because of these, like, lucrative shoe deals, right? For instance, like at the height of the protest of, George Floyd, and Black Lives Matter, Dwayne Wayne, who's, retired, posted something like, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. But meanwhile, he's got deals with all these Chinese companies that are believed that, Congress is pushing these players to not do business with these companies. For instance, because again, like, some of these companies are believed to be using forced labor.
Well, Mark, can I jump in right fast? Because you mentioned Congress before. I can only take what Congress says about these issues with a grain of salt, right? Because they got problems themselves, right? You got Democrats with Republicans. They got problems themselves. So anytime I see a political figure chime in on what's happening in China, I know they have an obligation to do so. But I also start thinking, is this theater, right? Or are you just getting in and on because it's part of the news cycle, it's part of the momentum when you have more important issues to worry about here?
Yeah. Mark, what do you think?
A few different points. One is the idea of players interacting with businesses in places that they might not necessarily agree with does not begin with China. There's a very famous Michael Jordan quote from early in his career, Republicans buy sneakers too. So I don't think that's anything new. Now, two things stand out to me. One is the quote from the Golden State Warriors owner was absolutely atrocious. And I don't know if we heard
Let's remind everybody about that quote.
The quote was, and I'm paraphrasing, we don't care about the Uyghurs. Now, I don't know if that was, or nobody cares about the Uyghurs. Now, I don't know if that was a sub-segment that got taken out of context or the entirety of the quote. Because even if you listen to the Chinese government, and I know you have to look at actions as opposed to words, but not even the Chinese government is saying nobody cares about the Uyghurs. So that was an especially bad statement and bad quote to be coming from that owner. So we have to keep that in mind. But the other thing that we have here too that we need to think about, I'd like to think back when I took a business ethics class at the Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania. I took it with Thomas Dunphy. And he created a concept known as integrative social contract theory. And the real idea of that is there are certain things in society that are hypernorms. And no matter where in the world you operate, you should have to follow those hypernorms. But there are other things within society that maybe there's some gray space based on the culture of the place in which you are. And one of the things we have to figure out more about what's going on in China is how many of these things that we're bothered by we would consider acceptable norms of the culture. And if some of these accusations, such as the accusations of genocide, if those had any element of truth to it, or the accusations of internment camps, that would seem to be a violation of a hypernorm. So I think we need to understand more what's going on in China. And is this the kind of situation where we could accept it as being China doing their own thing? Or is there a global hypernorm that might be being violated, which would be a very different kind of a situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ample evidence to show that, I'm very kind of reticent about using the word genocide in any situation because that's a legal definition and you really need to kind of know your international law and that kind of stuff. Clearly, there's a problem with the Uyghurs and detention camps. I don't think anybody's, really disputing that. But Jabari, you said, and I want to delve into this issue about how, China can play the NBA can play a constructive role in China. Silver said showing NBA games could, quote, play a productive role for U.S. and China citizens to have a better understanding of each other and see that we're all human beings and that there's a commonality. And that form of engagement is really important to resolving some issues. So clearly, we've talked about the business interests, which are considerable, but now let's talk about the cultural and kind of engagement interests that I think the NBA does think that it can build a bridge between the U.S. and China. Yeah,
they think that. Whether or not it'll work or not, it remains to be seen. But again, that the country, China they demand, right, a certain way of doing business. And if you violate that, then they get upset. And the NBA has found themselves in the middle of that. But, I watched an old video. It was when the Sixers went over there a couple of years ago. And I remember when Kawhi Leonard, somebody I covered, when he went over there to kind of just explore. It does bring people together. Sports brings people together, your differences aside. So I think Adam Silver, the commissioner, has a good point in trying to attempt that. Again, when it comes right down to geopolitical affairs, it's a hard line to walk because you're dealing with two different ideals, two different democracies. The NBA in that same quote that you were mentioning, Adam Silver, he also said, listen, we don't bless everything that's going on in China. We are a U.S. American company, right? We operate by government laws in this country. And when it goes down to you trying to determine what laws and what things are violated in other countries, it's a tricky line. It really is. And if you continue to want to do business there like the NBA does, you have to walk and navigate that line very, very, very carefully. And I found that the NBA is doing that. I think Mark kind of mentioned what was going on with Mr. Freedom and comparing it to Colin Kaepernick. And yes, he finds himself out of the NBA right at the present time. I don't know if that's a blackball issue or not, but it's something to keep your eye on, right? Because he has been very outspoken. And, that when you talk about that culture thing, it's interfering with that. When you have an outspoken player like him, going on and saying things like that, it does kind of, the tension kind of builds back up. Whether or not he's been blackballed or not, I think if we see some evidence behind that, that's going to be a major thing, and the NBA is going to have another bad PR cycle on their hands. Right now, you're just looking at him as an unpaid player who's not signed at the present time. But at the same time, I think that the cultures are aligned. Listen, NBA is going back over to China. They're going to play games back in China. The players are still going to go back over there. They got to go back over there for obviously to continue to build their brands, right? Because they're businesses themselves, and also for obligations for sneaker companies. And again, that's all a part of culture, because no matter what you think about other, places outside of the U.S. walls, everybody buys product. And the NBA at the end of the day is trying to buy a product, and they're obviously going to use culture to try to align that business. They've been doing a good job up to thus far until 2019. And I expect, though, that it will get back online. I expect for these tensions to calm. I expect for, the world affairs to maybe see eye to eye on things, because you have to operate some way, somehow. And the NBA is going to try to walk that line again. To get back to your original question, they're going to try to walk that line and align the cultures as best they can. I don't know if it's going to happen this time around. There's just too much differences. But at the end of the day, I suspect that it'll help.
Liz, can I jump in for a moment?
What's that?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So I have spent some time in China. I've spent 2 6-week periods living in Chengdu, China, as part of a joint relationship between Baruch College and the SWUFI, which is a Southwest University of Finance and Economics in Chengdu, China. And when I walk in the first day to teach there, and I ask my students, do you know Major League Baseball? Even the one or two of them with Yankee hats know nothing about it. I try to talk about the NFL. They know nothing.
They know everything about the NBA.
The NBA and esports. They know everything about the NBA. They watch the games. They have favorite teams. They have favorite players. In terms of me walking in there and trying to bond with students in the first week, it is amazing the role that it has. And I've had the chance to attend a basketball game in China. It's a very different culture of a game, because China's culture is different. They don't have concession stands. There's limited food, but the fans are really enthusiastic, and the community is really into basketball. And a big part of the time, if you ask people in China, or at least if you ask my students in China, what do you know about the United States? And last time that I was there was 2019. They knew a lot of negative about what was going on in the Trump administration, which was negative in itself and probably presented even worse by their government. And they knew the NBA. And the NBA was probably the most positive depiction that the younger generation of Chinese had of the United States and American culture.
They're really cultural exports.
Absolutely.
And so the game is going to be the All-Star game, tip off on Sunday. Is that going to 6 international All-Stars? Is that going to be played in China?
I don't know. I don't know. Not anytime soon. The time difference is too much. I mean, listen, we see what's going on with the Olympics and how that's impacting ratings. I mean, it's just the time difference, I think, is too much. But I feel like the NBA is going to continue, again, to build. The All-Star game will be shown. They're going to continue to build NBA experience centers, and they're going to continue to invest in China and building their product. But, whether or not you're talking about going over there to play things like the finals and the All-Star games, I don't think we're at that point yet. What we are, though, is that, you're getting back to a repairing phase between the two parties. Again, China wants the NBA. And if they didn't, you would see that they're not allowed there, that the business wouldn't continue there. They want the NBA. They're just sending a message right now. They don't approve of everything that is coming out from a freedom of speech standpoint, but they can do nothing about that.
So we talk about, Mark was talking about how these players are cultural exports, okay? It doesn't seem like, and I want to remind everybody what Mr. Freedom did, okay? So he was wearing a shirt that was talking about, free Tibet, wearing a shirt of the Dalai Lama, really kind of commenting, he called Xi Jinping a dictator and said he supports Tibetan people's cause for freedom. Now, does that, because they're such cultural exports, does that influence how Chinese are seeing their country? Because it's certainly not going to change the government's actions in Tibet. Mark.
I don't think the Chinese government wants to allow its people to see the Chinese government depicted that way. If you look at the Chinese government, I mean, all types of people in China will get onto Twitter and perhaps post things that are negative about the government. The government only intervenes when it's seen more than a de minimis amount of time. So from the Chinese government's perspective, if this were a Chinese athlete that was doing this and it took place in China, they would see this as being a potential step towards insurrection, and there would be action, and there would be sanctions.
But we see what happened with other Chinese tennis players and such. I mean, these guys would disappear.
Absolutely.
So now, in a sense, they're disappearing from Chinese air. I mean, they're obviously not being abducted. It's not the same thing, but they don't want any. It's not like it doesn't make a difference to them.
And this isn't just the NBA. I mean, we saw the same thing happen with Cathay Pacific Airlines when they took a position that was favorable to Hong Kong. We've seen this to other companies, that because the Chinese business interests are so intertwined with the government, and that's based on Chinese capitalism with Maoist aspects to it, which is different from our version of capitalism that has greater separation. It's easier for the Chinese government to say, we are a stakeholder in these businesses that are doing work with another business, the NBA teams, that joint venture. And if you will not limit your conduct in a way we want you to, we might not be able to take jurisdiction over Enos Kanter Freedom directly. We might not be able to take jurisdiction over Daryl Morey, but we could cause enough financial harm to our business partner in the NBA teams that perhaps the teams might think twice about letting Daryl Morey speak publicly or letting Enos Kanter Freedom spread his message. And I think that's
Mark, I in a way I disagree, only because, getting back to the David Stern conversation about when I asked why the Chinese wouldn't take such measures like that, you can't, because listen, India is coming. That's 1 billion people too. Africa is online, and the NBA just started their NBA Africa.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. It definitely looks like they're expanding into Africa, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can't, if you're the Chinese government, you can't just say, "Oh, we're going to cut you off," because again, this is a form of entertainment you're taking away from your people. Okay, that you don't want to interfere with that type of business, with that type of cultural connection. So again, they want it. They want the NBA, and there are going to be people that still speak out about things. I mean, listen, we live in this. This is what makes this country so great. We're allowed to talk about this. We're allowed to have this forum and express our opinion, right or wrong. That's what the gift is of this country. That's the beauty of it. The consequences behind that, though, could be a little extreme. I don't ever think that you'll see, China completely shut out the NBA. I don't ever think that you'll see them come out and say, "Hey, mute that guy, or we're going to cut off you." But they just can't do it. They'll send a couple of financial hits their way, but the NBA is such a big product, and they're going to remain a big product. The viewership is going to continue to go. That if you're the China, that part of the money they're cutting off, it'll be minimum. So I don't think you'll see it go to that extreme. You'll just see them, obviously, if a player on a team says one thing, the same way that they did with the Boston Celtics, they'll cut them off of Weibo, they'll cut them off of Tencent, but not the NBA as a whole.
All right, we're going to go to questions in a minute. Don't forget, type ccga.live in your browser. We already have a couple of questions. But before we do, Mark, we talked about kind of NBA opening up to Africa. Is the way the NBA is dealing with China unique to China, or is this just kind of business as general, because it definitely seems it's not bad for business in terms of social issues here in the US, like supporting Black Lives Matter. Is this just unique to China?
I think China is uniquely important to the NBA. Jabari spoke a lot about why the NBA is important to the Chinese, but China is uniquely important to the NBA. First, because it's
That's why I wanted to ask, like, why should NBA fans in the U.S. care about this at all?
I mean, this is a large sum of money right here that the NBA makes through operating NBA China. They were also first in. So by being first in of the U.S. sports leagues, as well as the historic relationship of basketball in China, the NBA is the leader here, and they want to maintain that lead. There's no doubt that the NBA has interests in expanding NBA Africa and expanding NBA around the world. But if you look at sports diffusion from the United States to other countries, China is a uniquely important venture from the standpoint of the NBA owners, based upon the length of time and based upon the potential amount of money that's in the country. I think they would sooner shut down a venture that brings in less money and that they might consider less a part of their core venture. They have offices with entire teams that are staffed in China. This is not like pulling out of an exhibition game to them. I don't think that they would so easily be willing to do it by choice.
Okay, we're going to go to questions. Ryan from Chicago already I think, Ryan, we just went through your question. Are there other markets with similar dynamics that the NBA should be or concerned with? I think, we're looking towards Africa, we're looking towards other markets, but clearly this kind of situation, this delicate balance that we've been discussing is kind of unique to China. Jabari, Rachel asks, do you think pressure from the US and China will force players to become more geopolitically fluent?
Yes, especially if they're going to speak out about issues that, are geopolitical related, and it's best to get, well educated on what's going on outside of the walls if you're going to speak about, those topics. So listen, I think there are players that are very smart about geopolitical issues. The NBA is filled with intelligent minds and intelligent people. But again, you talk about speaking out on issues. Not everybody has the courage to do that. Not everybody wants to do that because of what we've seen happen to Mr. Freedom. They have livelihoods as well. I respect that because we have the right of freedom of speech and because they can, express their opinion does not mean that they have to. And for a guy who doesn't want to say anything, I respect that as well. For somebody who's willing to speak out on it, I respect that as well. But I feel like what we saw happen with Daryl Morey, what we saw, go back and forth with, LeBron James, I feel like that was an example of, hey, you know what? You need to be well versed on things before speaking out about it. And I feel like if any NBA player, any athlete, any individual is going to speak out on geopolitical affairs, it's best to be well versed and go to China like Mark did. I do want to get there one day.
Yeah, no, I think it's important.
Yeah.
And to that end, Mark, we have a question from Gary, but it's this larger, how can the NBA continue to bend to the will of China when liberty and justice are on the line? And I think it opens up a question that we face with our athletes here at home as well. Like, we look to these guys as heroes. We look to these, sports figures as leaders. Are they obligated to, if we're promoting kind of U.S. sports abroad and U.S. culture abroad, are they obligated to promote American values?
It's a really interesting question. On the one hand, I have an incredible amount of respect for Enos Kanter Freedom for speaking out on something he believes in, especially in his context, growing up in Turkey, from the region of the world he's in, from his ethnicity that he's from. He might have stronger views and maybe more experience with these issues than a lot of other players do. On the other hand, I'm getting concerned that there's this growing movement that whenever we don't like anything that anybody is doing, we say cancel.
Cancel culture.
China is different from us. And again, the point I was trying to make before when I brought up integrative social contract theory is we're very quick nowadays to say cancel this, cancel that canceling is somehow better than social diffusion and social interaction. And that's become part of America's new answer to everything. Now, if it turns out, and I don't have enough information to speak on this, if it truly turns out that there is something on the level that's approaching a genocide or something like that going on in a country,
is that the bar? Is that the bar, though? I mean, look, I think there's a definite, and Jabari, I want to get you to weigh in on this too. I think there's a definite balance between, wanting to show leadership, but also, hey, I just want to play my sport. Like, athletes are at the Olympics right now. The U.S. boycotted it. But we didn't see that many athletes stay home. They want to play. They want to, do what they love. And
Elise, just to be clear, I'm not saying that anything short of a genocide is okay. I'm giving the extreme example where there is a point where U.S. business interests can't be solved. There is a point. There is some line that gets crossed that says we cannot be affiliated with this and we have to take all steps to boycott. But the great overall extent to which cancel culture is coming into play, I think we need to be careful to ask ourselves the question, what is the thing that will help more? And is pulling out going to help the situation more, or will help more to continue to have the American cultural diffusion? The more Americanism that's seen by the people in China, is that a good thing? I don't have the answer to that. I'm not going to say there's an easy answer to it, but I think we need to think deeply about that.
And to kind of piggyback off that, I think we need to think deeply about even seeking, certain people's viewpoints on things. I mean, listen, a lot of these guys, I don't know if they signed up to play in the NBA to also be a leader. I don't know if they signed up to play basketball and play sports to also speak out on these issues. And so very fact that we have cancel culture, and the first thing that we don't agree with, or the first world issue, the first thing we do is we go ask LeBron James about it. I don't know if that's fair to LeBron. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that's fair to us, because at that point, is it a soundbite? What is it? Why are we not asking some people more well-versed on these issues? That's what I seek out. I don't try to go get LeBron's opinion on it. He may have his opinion, he may not. I don't try to go get James Harden, any of these guys' opinion on it, because they're paid to play a sport, and I want to allow them to do their business. But if I want some opinion on geopolitical affairs, I want some comment, I think it's better to ask somebody that's their business, to study these issues.
I think it's a really valid point. Lindsay, one of our questioners, asked, and I think this, kind of plays into that. Will NBA business interests always supersede human rights, or is there a tipping point? And I think we all agree maybe there is a tipping point, and we're kind of figuring out if, what that is. But I do see your point. Like, look, these athletes, are we expecting, too much of them? And this is, these have larger questions about influencer culture and, why are we taking certain people's opinions? Like, why are we taking a sports person's opinion on China over another? I think it opens up a lot of interesting questions. Jabari, we have a question from Tanya. Is the NBA getting pressure from its sponsors and partners on China?
If they were, we don't know about it, because they would have cut business off already. I don't think so. And talking to people within the sports business industry, that's one of the topics that, I was talking about. Like, how did this tension, like, how did it really impact the NBA and business overall? And they said very minimum. We see the soundbite, we see the clips, and we see them being asked about it, but sponsors are not necessarily going to pull out, because it hasn't reached an issue where you're starting to see people turn off. People are still watching the NBA. Ratings are back up again because, once the pandemic kind of cooled down. When you start to see that happen, or you start to see people pull out, or you start to see too many people speak out against this, then sponsors say, hey, we're not getting the impressions that we want from your product, so we're gonna pull it. If you want an example of that, go look at what happened with the Washington Commanders. They're the Washington Commanders for a reason. You know why? Sponsors said, yeah, we can't support this other name anymore. We're pulling out. Point. So when you start to see that, then that's when you start to see the NBA react. Until that point, no. Listen, Nike's one of the biggest companies in the world. They got a lot of business in China, right? They got a lot of business with the NBA. Those two parties are aligned, right? And so I don't think sponsors are pressuring the NBA, with dealing with issues in China, at all.
Great point about the Commanders. Mark, I have a question from one of your students. I can't see the name here. Something Tepper, I think. But anyway,
not David Tepper, is it? The billionaire
David Tepper, yes. Donald Sterling was rightfully forced out as owner after making private racist, hurtful comments. Chamath Palihapitiya publicly made his statements. Why is the latter still an owner?
Students putting me on the spot here. It's revenge for what I do in class. The short and easy answer to this is...
before you say that, why don't you just backtrack and give our audience a little, set the scene for us what he's talking about.
So this is an owner of the Golden State Warriors. who came out and made the statement that nobody cares about the Uyghurs.
About the
in
Uyghurs.
the sense that we should not be paying attention to the issue about the Uyghurs being placed in camp.
Yeah.
Yes. The very short, easy sports answer about why we have not seen it is the NBA is a joint venture of 32 teams. Adam Silver acts on behalf of the teams overall. And if there would be a majority support amongst the owners of these teams to remove the Golden State Warriors owner, we probably would see Adam Silver beginning to take those steps, which leads me to believe that a super majority of the owners in the NBA do not support removal. What I think you're really asking me is not the sports law point. I think you're asking me as a moral question, should the owner of the Golden State Warriors be removed from this statement? And that's a very tough question. I mean, the statement in itself, from the way we hear it, nobody cares about this group that's an ethnic minority, is really, truly bothersome. And I don't know what's going on internally with the NBA, but that by far and away is the worst statement, not even close, that I've heard come out from anybody affiliated with the NBA with respect to anything in China.
Yeah.
Well,
I would, just to kind of piggyback on that right fast, listen, what Donald Sterling did was a completely different matter.
Remind everybody what Donald Sterling did.
Well, he used racist slurs, right? He used the N-word, he used racist slurs, and when you have a majority of your players are black, you can't, that's not going to fly. The minority owner of the Warriors is in a completely different spot. He has a very small to do with operations in the NBA. He is just what Adam Silver likes to call ownership accoutrements, right? You're a minority owner, you get all the perks and the ego of being an owner. If you try to remove that from him for making a statement on international affairs, then that's where we walk the line of, kind of censoring people, right? And interfering in free speech. And remember something, a lot of these NBA owners are not necessarily, they're not going to do that, because if you censor people, then you just got a major problem on your hands. So I think that's probably a part of it as well. And listen, right after he made that comment, the Warriors came out and said it themselves. He does not speak on our behalf, right? He doesn't have anything to do with operations, and we don't approve of this. And if it was really that concerning to Chinese government, I just saw the Mailman Group about the most popular teams in China right now. The Warriors are still number 2. The Boston Celtics, they fell 6 slots, right? Because they had a player that was attached to it, a part of their product, okay, who was still playing at the time he made these comments, which lets the people know listen, oh, y'all support this? So you see it drop. But in the Warriors case, it's just 2 completely different circumstances.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And then also the point you made earlier about, look, if you're an NBA team owner, maybe learn a little bit about China before you speak out. Like, maybe we do have to, if NBA is going to have these geopolitical partnerships, maybe we need to, be a little bit more geopolitically literate about what's going on.
Or don't speak out at all. Nobody is saying that you have to say anything.
But at least if you're going to speak out, like, at least know what the hell you're talking about, right?
Absolutely.
Don't just you can't just say whatever you want, because these things do have consequences. Well, look, we could go on for another half hour. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end. Thank you to Jabari Young and Marc Edelman. Check out the NBA All-Star Game tip-off on Sunday. And thank you to the Chicago Council for Global Affairs and to our Young Professionals group and all the audience and members who are watching. And until next time, you can look at the Chicago Council website for future events, and we look forward to seeing you next time.